Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today I'm going to paint the drawing that we did for our very first day of Garden-tober. And even though Garden-tober is over, we will be kind of finishing some of the pieces that we started during that time, painting some of the ones that we created together, and just kind of exploring them in different ways. So I'm excited to paint this. I'm thinking I'm going to use some of the same colors that I used throughout that series. If you're not familiar with this watercolor sketchbook I'm using, it's on Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper. I think I am going to start with sap green. We could mix the green, we could mix a sap green, which would be fine. But I'm just going to kind of skip a step. And I'm using a size 10 round brush, as well as I have a size 6 here. But my general rule of thumb, and something I heard from another artist, was use the biggest brush that you have. The biggest brush that will fit for what you're working with. So here we have some Winsor yellow, and I'm going to take just a tip of our Winsor red. You can see that was significantly more than just a tip, but going. Get a good, strong golden tone. We might not even need to do this. We probably could have used just straight Winsor yellow, but I usually don't like to just depend on the color straight from the tube too much. So we'll have kind of a gradient where we've got more of an orange tone, something in the middle, and then our more lemony yellow. Similar colors to Winsor yellow, if you don't have Winsor yellow, would be a lemon yellow, a transparent yellow, something kind of like that. Basically, you want a very light, cool tone yellow. And then we're also going to grab some ultramarine and throw that in here. Let me pull up that reference image again. I think we're going to mix a little bit of this with our sap green. If you're wondering why my paint palette is drowning, I tried to I tried to use my clean water is in this little creamer pitcher, and I tried to use that to try and skip a step and be a little bit lazy, but didn't go so well, so I don't recommend doing that. It will dry just fine. It'll be alright. Okay, so we're going to start painting. I'm actually going to switch over. I think I want to start with the goldeny yellow. So I'm going to switch over to the smaller brush and just see how we fit in here. We might switch back, especially for like some of these bigger ones. I want to clean this real well in my clean water. All right, let's get started. So we have the reference image I'll have up here. This bleed isn't worrying me. Shouldn't worry you too much. And I'm going to, what was I going to say? I don't remember. Don't worry about this bleed. I'm not worried about it, so don't you worry about it. All right, let's zoom in a bit. All right, as always, I will have our reference image, our inspiration on the screen. I'm grabbing just a touch of our lemon yellow on a brush that's mostly clean water. So we can see it's a little bit tinted. It's got just a little bit of a glow to it. And we're going to start adding it in. Now I'm going into kind of our more medium tone. Adding that in. You don't want it to be too wet, so don't be afraid to like dab your brush off. See, that's pretty wet. See how that blended very quickly? So I'm dabbing my brush off on the rag that I have. You can use paper towel as well. And we're just going to kind of dab this at the center. Dabbing my brush off, and I'm just kind of picking up any excess. If we need to do another coat of paint, we totally can. But it is hard to pick it up once it's down. I am going to pick up a little bit while it's wet, dabbing my brush off in between areas right here, because it has just a little bit of a highlight glow. Not excessive, but it gives the petal kind of a curved effect. Back in our Winsor yellow, so this is where it's mostly gold. I'm actually going to skip that one because they touch and they'll kind of blend and it'll cause problems later. And we're starting with this main focal flower because other elements in the composition aren't really in focus, and we'll be making up a little bit more. So we want to make sure we have this area planned out the way we want it to go before we dive into these. So we'll know a little bit more what to expect. But starting each one the same, where we're going in with our Winsor yellow. Kind of watered down, not too wet. And if you add too much water, just dab your brush off. What you don't want is you don't want there to be a big puddle sitting there. Let me show you. So you see that sheen? So there's a sheen. There's a little bit of like a dollop of paint here. I can pick that up. But you just want it to have this nice sheen to it. Sorry if it was out of focus. It's hard for me to tell from that angle. All right, again, grabbing a little bit of more of our orangey tone. We're just going to tap that in there. Make sure that there's not too much water on your brush or you'll create a funny bloom. I'm also going to tap a little bit on this underside. Now that's not necessarily my reference image. I just like to have a way to differentiate the kind of top of the petal from the bottom. Some petals have kind of a natural color differentiation, some don't. But we're just going to kind of give it a little bit of a shadow. Same over here. All right, back in our Winsor yellow. And we're just going to do the same thing over here. I'm pulling in just kind of this raw color. And then going in with our orangey tone here. See how that's spread and it's kind of puddling, so I'm just going to pick some of that up. It's still pretty wet, so I'm going to give it a minute, fill in this side, and then we'll go in with our secondary tone. Sometimes it works when everything is wet at the same time. Sometimes it doesn't, and if it's not working, just wait. Watercolor has a mind of its own, and the more we try to force it to do what we want, the more likely it is that it will fight us. So dabbing my brush off, I went beyond the line a little bit, but that'll be okay in the end. Dabbing my brush off, going into our more orangey tone right here at the base. Dabbing my brush off. All right, back to the Winsor yellow. One thing I found with this paper is it kind of sucks up some of that saturation. So you might be working with colors that you normally work with, and they just aren't showing up quite as bright as you might be expecting them to. That's okay, but something that I've noticed. So I'll show you kind of a couple tricks that you can try to bring some of that saturation back in. But I mean, having this be almost pure lemony yellow, that's pretty dull. So we'll do a couple more layers. Look at this in comparison. That was the same color applied. So we'll try a couple of things, but something to keep in mind if you use this sketchbook. I've still really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed painting it as well, but I've started to notice that more and more. Or if I have like a more muted painting, it turns out very grayscale. Very muted. Okay, again, we're going to just pick this up to kind of give it a highlighted area. That's just kind of curving. So you can see it mostly disappeared there, but it, as we add another layer to it, it will kind of continue. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to be a little less exact because they are secondary elements and not our focal element. Again with the orange right at the tip. If it seems to be bubbling, feel free to clean your brush off and wipe them off, and we'll repeat the same thing on this one. Alright, one trick is we're going to take some more of that Winsor yellow and I'm going to apply it right at the center of these buds. By having that just pure pigment there as an underlayer for our green, it'll give it a nice glow quality, which these have kind of a limey green look. I'm also going to add a little bit of that to some of our petals, not all of them, or petals, leaves. Very watered down. So see how kind of light that is? But it will kind of add this living glowing quality, like I said, that will help with some of our saturation issues. All right, let's go in for another pass, again with the Winsor yellow, just to kind of brighten these up. So this one's just going to be a quick pass of the yellow to brighten this up a bit. Just your pure Winsor yellow. And that should give it a little bit more life, and then we'll do another pass to add any shadows. And we're going to do this to all of the flowers, except that petal in the background. 1, 2, 3. Do I sound like the Tootsie Roll Pop Owl? Because that's kind of what I was going for. Alright, they're brightening up a bit. It's still not as bright as I would have wanted, but that's okay. Okay, I actually think I'm going to do a quick layer of our yellow on just kind of that main top of the center of our RUDBECKIA. And then I'm going to go in with some burnt umber, which is a warm brown tone, and it's very warm, so I'm going to cool it down by taking some ultramarine and mixing that with it, kind of like this. And I'm going in, kind of, see how I'm making stripes down? I do need to go in kind of and fuss with this a little bit. But by making stripes, it kind of helps with the illusion. It's more of a drawing trick than a painting trick, but I don't know, I'm usually of the mind of like, I'll take all of the tricks, thank you. So we're just doing kind of this bottom section almost of the pie, if you remember from drawing this section. And then we're going to repeat on the other flowers. But I am going to keep it a little lighter. Alright, so now I have this section that is drying. I'm going to just add a little bit more pigment while this is still wet to kind of the edges to give it, again, kind of a rounded effect. It was probably a little too pigmented, so we're going to take a clean brush and just blend that out. And the same thing here. Alright, we're going to let that dry and switch over to the greenery. For the stems and these buds, I'm going to use the smaller brush, and then I'm going to switch to the larger brush for some of the leaves. So I'm just going to go into our sap green. And I'm going to, should we yellow it up just a touch for the brightness factor? I'm going to add in some Winsor yellow. Just a touch, so it's just a little more limey than originally. I'm going to take just a touch of our ultramarine blue and I'm just going to tap it in here. That'll create a little bit more of a shadow, and having the blue in there is just a little more interesting. But trying to make it a smooth gradient, cleaning my brush off again, going back in with our green to finish this one out. All right, for an area like this where the curve of the leaf is hitting the stem, I will finish that out too, and then I'm just gonna let this fade. But these are touching at the same point, so I want to bring that together at the same time. Washing my brush. I'm gonna get this wet again. I just want it to kind of fade. I'm gonna take a regular tissue, or you can use a bath tissue or a paper towel, and while it's wet, I'm just going to dab. Then we'll have kind of a softened edge there. All right, we're going to repeat for the other stems, and then we'll do our little buds. All right, now for these little buds, we're gonna pretty much just go over them in the green for now. I'll do an additional pass with some shadow there, but see how that yellow underlayer gives it kind of a little bit more of a glow. And then just tapping in a little more color here at the base. All right, switching to our larger brush, we're going to go in and we're going to add our leaves. I'm going to start light. Well, we'll just kind of start with what we got. I'm going to start over here. I think I might actually mix. So we have our sap green. I'm going to mix a little bit of ultramarine with that, just to give us a slightly cooler green. And we're just going to start painting. It'll also be kind of a nice little way to differentiate it from the other areas, such as the stems. This paper dries so fast. I'm actually going to clean that brush off. And while this is still wet, I'm going to take a barely damp brush and just go over the whole thing, even bringing in this section underneath. And then go in with just some ultramarine and kind of going along that center area. A little less, switching to the smaller brush just to kind of spread stuff out a bit. By having that little bit of blue there, it'll help everything to kind of pop nicely. All right, so I think I'm going to do, big brush has the green, the blue-green mixture, and the little brush has just our ultramarine on it. So we're kind of mixing on the page, which is not something I do very often, but it can help with areas like this where you want some little extra. I'm going to go in with a little more green. It's just got a little too blue here. All right, let's repeat. All right, again, we'll do another pass, but let's clean our brush off, grab our brown, and do a light layer, a little lighter than that, over this section. Again, just lightly, kind of looking like old straw kind of thing. We'll go in again, now that the whole thing is wet, and we'll just kind of tap into the side of it just a touch to kind of create, again, that gradient. And then a light layer over these guys. Cleaning my brush off. I'm going to clean it in my clean water, so it's very clean, and we're going to go in with our orangey tone and start to add some definition to some of these petals. This will be very light. We won't be adding a ton in, but just enough. And adding in some of these shadows to give a little bit more texture and depth to it and just make it a little more interesting. Might even add a little bit of the brown in here, but I'm just going to see how it goes for now. So I'm looking at my reference image, I'm looking for where there are shadows and some deeper areas. And I'm just working tonal now. We can add if we really needed some super deep shadows in here, or it just wasn't getting quite dark enough. We could go in with complementary colors. So in this case, we probably just pull in some of our ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of the red, just to get it deep enough. But I think I'm kind of going for softer. And then on this side as well. Getting this shadow here on this petal, going in a little more color, this little turn up that happens. All right, we're just going to repeat the same but less on the other flowers. And we're doing less because they're a little farther away, and so we're not going to be able to see as much detail. You shouldn't be counting the freckles on something across the room, you know what I mean? All right, looking decidedly more orange than they used to be. I'm going to add just a touch of blue to our yellow, and just a touch to kind of our orangey color. We really don't need a lot since it's so dark to get a nice neutral color. We could go in with our brown, but I'm thinking we'll just go in with this because it has, you know, the same tone. And we're just going to add those final little details. So again, pulling up that reference image, just carving out those final shadows. So really not making many marks. All right, and again, there's going to be a couple spots I want to add this darker color to the other petals, or the other flowers, but it's not going to be a lot. It's going to be very minimal, so this can kind of stay. This one's the focal point. This one just kind of repeats things. All right, going back in with our brown, the burnt umber and ultramarine blue, I'm going to go in again. These are also striped, so they're a little more spread out, so we're getting kind of some texture, some definition built up. Oh, excuse me, because even though this is very dark, we want it to have a semblance of, like some sense made out of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing, kind of following the pencil lines that we had just made with some of our drawing. Focusing them on the left-hand side, which is currently my shadow area. Slightly watered down brush, so we're kind of spreading things out a bit more. Just getting it in there. Leaving some areas kind of around the perimeter of the pie, if you will, bare. If we need to, we can cover them up, but it's significantly more difficult to bring them out again, so we're just going to be very selective. All right, we're going to do something similar, but again, lighter and just not as much. Maybe not that lit. Alright, I see my battery is dying, so the light might change here in a moment, but I won't paint without you. It is a new day, our battery is charged. I'm working with the same water, the same palette, though the palette's dried out a bit. And we're going to dive in a little bit more. We're going to grab still with that same size 6 brush, we're going to grab our sap green, the kind of bluer tone mixed with the ultramarine. I'm going to grab some of this. And we're going to start kind of in this center section. We're kind of do the same process we did at the leaves, where we're going in with a second pass to kind of build up some of that intensity. And then if needed, we'll go in with some of these other, going kind of with the complement in like a more desaturated tone. And I'm just starting that center there where it gets nice and dark. And I'm just kind of branching out. Let's zoom in. Just kind of pulling in to capture some of that texture. We're going to do the same thing down here. But because we have kind of that yellow layer underneath, we're kind of already working with some nice highlights and some nice brightening. I accidentally covered that, so I just took my brush, cleaned it off, got it wet, and I'm picking that up. Alright, back in with our pigment. Just kind of deepen some of these areas, wiping it off, so that each layer is nice and light. I'm going to deepen this section here, this little side petal thing, just so that it comes forward a little bit more and allowing that one to kind of fade. Going in with a little bit more of the blue mixed with our green, but more heavy on the blue. just to deepen that area a bit. It just wasn't tucking in the way I wanted it to. All right, now let's go in on our leaves. We're just going to do kind of another layer. I'm not sure exactly how much detail I want to put in on this. I could really kind of carve out some of these areas, wiping my brush off. But I honestly don't know if I want to get into that much detail. And I think I'm just going to do that where it's pretty subtle. We've got some nice fading still. We've got a little more definition. But I don't want it to take over our petals that we have. So see how it's kind of mirroring some of the detail we have in here and some of that emphasis, but not taking over. That's kind of what I'm going for. I don't want it to be too detailed for this. There's always, depending on the style that you're pursuing, which some, like if you're working in photorealism, you want to make sure that you're consistently adding those details in. And I had a professor who would draw every single brick. And I've been there. I've had those projects, but it's not just because it's the right answer for a certain style doesn't mean that you have to do that for every project. I'm going to spend less time on each one as they go back. So I don't want there to be a lot of detail, just giving a hint of some of that definition, wiping my brush off. Very watered down. Whoops, not even enough. All right, now we're going to go in with our blue with a little bit of that green, and I'm going to take some red, kind of like this. I don't need a lot, so I might even mix a little bit more of the green with it just to, I definitely want it to still lean green, but I want there to be the neutral element to it. All right, now we're going to use this just to kind of carve out these tiny little details. Wiping my brush off because there's just a little too much on there. Just carrying a little too much. And using a color like this, generally less is more. So find where you want it, place it in, and move on. Could have taken kind of our burnt umber color, but that's okay. Wiping my brush off, so I've got a damp brush with very little pigment on it. I'm just bringing that down on the edge here.
All right, taking more of that pigment so it's a little more concentrated. Just going to place that here. See how that tucks that right in? And I'm also going to add a little more of our blue back in. We lost some of it here, so I'm just going to add it in a glaze. A glaze is a very light layer, added quickly with not like a lot of rubbing. So you're not like rubbing your brush around. And not a ton of water, so as not to pick up the pigment underneath, and not a ton of pigment. It's very subtle. Okay, a little bit of green here. I'm just going to kind of swoosh this around this side. A little more blue. These are kind of the fine details. All right, and I think we're gonna stop there. I'm kind of tempted to play around with like a very blue-green background, but I'm not sure yet if I want to do that. I am gonna add a little bit of our kind of brown greeny tone back here just to knock that back. Okay, now I can move on with my life. I like kind of the green tones in here. I think a green, blue-green background would be really fun, but I don't think I'm going to pursue it this time around. Maybe in the future, or maybe even in a future video. If you'd be interested in seeing that, maybe we'll pursue that as well, and I'll kind of show you how to get like the illusion of more flowers back there, kind of like in our reference photo actually, but with that blue-green background. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this process of both the drawing and now the watercolor portion of this tutorial. I hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day. If you have any requests, be sure to leave them in the comment section down below. And until next time, happy painting.